I'm going to get started as it's just coming up to 2 minutes past 1. Just like to welcome you all. Thanks for joining on another Friday lunchtime webinar with us at the Land App. And today we're joined by Mick, who I will introduce a bit later. Today we're going to be talking about using the Land App for landscape projects, where it's going to be a bit of a showcase of the Land App and a Q&A from one of our existing test and trials. Using the tool on landscape collaboration. Before we do so, just a reminder that everyone's microphones are muted. We do want to engage with you as much as possible, and we've got a dedicated question and answer session at the end. So if you have got any questions, both technical about the Land App or to pose to our panelists today, please do use the Q&A function, which you can access at the bottom of your screen on the Zoom channel. As always, we're looking to constantly update and improve the Land App. So if you've got any product feedback, do feel free to get in contact with us either via our support page on the website or through support@thelandapp.com. And if you haven't got a Land App account, just a reminder that you, for what I'm showing today, a lot of it is part of the free software. So I would recommend you creating an account, but also most of the demo will be referring to our professional subscription. So the agenda for today is as follows. We're going to do a bit of an overview of the growing need for landscape restoration projects, both looking at the environmental need, but also how these might attract funding opportunities. We're then going to spend about 10 minutes in conversation with our panelist, Mick Holding, as part of the EPIC test and trials, to hear how they're doing over in the Irwell Catchment. We're then going to be discussing how the Land App's used by land managers, focusing to start with at the individual farm level, how we can democratize data, encourage both the landowners and the advisors that work with those landowners to take ownership of what they're doing, but mapping in a concise and consistent way. We're hopefully going to be demonstrating a relatively intuitive approach, how you can build up your baselines, build up your plans to start really getting a feed of supply ready for the upcoming ELMs and private markets, and also hopefully demonstrate the value of collaboration. Then once we've looked at that individual farm, we're going to take a zoom out and show you just the map of maps function for really how you can, as a facilitator or someone managing multiple clients, how you can start to put their plans next to one another so you get that landscape view. This will be looking as well at working with live data and hopefully generating conversations. We're then going to again take one more step out, not just looking at the data visually, but also how you can start to generate analytics using our new dashboards, which allows you to both, aggregate and sum what's currently being mapped on the Land App for the total, say, area or the number of individuals you're engaging. And what we're really hoping to do is obviously develop this as much as we can to provide a clear structure for both ELMs and for the private markets. Then we're going to come on to a bit of a what's next section, just the need for monitoring, training facilitators, etc. And hopefully that will lead nicely into our discussion. And so with this in mind, what I'd like to do is introduce my guest for the session. He's Mick Holding, who's working on behalf of Groundwork on the ELMS Partnership in the Irwell Catchment. And so Mick, I'd like to just welcome you to unmute yourself and come and introduce both who you are and who Groundwork is and what you're hoping to achieve under your EPIC test and trial.
Yeah, I'm hoping you can hear me.
Yep, I can hear you nice and clear, thank you.
So yeah, I'm working on the so-called EPIC test and trial, which I'll explain what EPIC stands for in a bit on behalf of Groundwork. Groundwork are a UK-wide federation of charities with a history of involving communities in the practical improvements to environment. So it's all about empowering and training communities, and that's their history. They're slightly unusual in the Greater Manchester Groundwork, one of the federation, in that they are the catchment partner, catchment host on behalf of DEFRA for the River Irwell Catchment due to historic reasons, and they quite unusually have expanded their community to include farmers. So the Irwell Catchment covers 800 square kilometres, just north of Manchester. Most of it is in the Greater Manchester Combined Authority area, but some isn't, which introduces a bit of interesting complexity. But anyway, that's Groundwork. My background is working in agri-environment schemes going back to year 2000. So with Natural England latterly, but predecessor organisations. For the last 6 years or so, I've been an independent consultant involved in doing scheme applications for farmers. And I've been involved with Groundwork through most of that time as well on various projects, starting with a facilitated group. So facilitated group in the Irwell Catchment to look specifically at natural flood risk management, which is a 3-year CSF funded scheme that then has moved on to continuing my engagement because of an impression that historically in the Irwell Catchment and in the Greater Manchester peri-urban so-called area in general, there's been low uptake of agri-environment schemes. There's a variety of reasons for that, but given that impression and that reality on the ground, it only takes a look at Magic Map and populating it with agri-environment scheme cover to see that there's a bit of a gap. So we had postulated that a local partnership to help facilitate access to the forthcoming ELM schemes would be beneficial to this area to try and tackle this. So the EPIC name, which I said I would explain, is ELM's Partnership in the Irwell Catchment, which is all about, as I've explained, facilitating access, and it's about tackling some of those barriers, and the barriers being in the peri-urban area, various. So the effect of being in the peri-urban area on farming and the problems that introduces, as well as the opportunities that introduces, and one of the opportunities being horses. So in the Greater Manchester area, for example, there's 5,500 horses, which has a profound effect on land management in that area. The pattern of land ownership and tenure, so the influence of tenancies and the control of landowners on those tenancies, the various types of tenancies, another barrier. So the EPIC partnership has sought to engage all the usual partners in the area, including the largest landowner, which is a utility company, which will be quite a common thing, I would have thought, but including all the usual suspects, so Natural England, NFU. We've got our community forests involved, City of Trees in Manchester in this partnership.
Yes, so I was doing a bit of research both about your test and trial generally and Groundwork. And by the way, just a note, if anyone's not familiar with the work of Groundwork, I would recommend having a look at their website, because it's not, you're obviously not just covering the agricultural elements. It's just more about generally how do you mobilize the communities to work together for the environment almost. And just as a bit of context for everyone out there, I think probably from Mick's intro you can hear that there's hopefully a lot of things that you can relate to, where you've got many different blockers, many different challenges, but what you're really trying to do is unlock what is this future for the land sector. So I was just going to, on that point of blockers, Mick, I was wondering, when you're applying for the ELMS trial and what you're now trying to achieve with the ELMS trial, what have been the main blockers or challenges?
Primary blocker is the scale of the task. So as I mentioned, the Irwell Catchment, if we're talking about catchment scale, so there are many blockers, as all of your attendees today will be aware, I would have thought. But the scale of the task in terms of dealing at a catchment scale is one. So if we're talking 800 square kilometres, which is what, 80,000 hectares, half of that being urban. What we've got 800 plus farms in that area of various patterns of engagement, non-engagement, historic engagement, mostly historic non-engagement, and we've got kind of a lack of historic agency engagement in that area, because it's not perceived as rural. A lot of the agencies traditionally have focused on the rural. And I suppose there's a really good reason for some of this, naturally, just because you know, the concentration of where the farmland is and what peri-urban means in terms of when you look at the map. So you've got the barrier of sheer scale and lack of historic engagement. In our facilitated group historically, which finished a couple of years ago, we actually failed to get a new facilitation fund. But anyway, in that group, over the 3 years we were operating, we managed to engage with around 35 land managers covering around 12,000 hectares. So we weren't pushing extremely hard, but we were around for 3 years, and yet we still were only engaging with, say, a quarter of the land area. Right. So that being one of the major blockers, I think another major blocker is uncertainty, and this will be something that I dare say will chime with everyone else. So uncertainty after several years of scheme development in what the schemes will look like, in what the options are. We know options are under development, but we don't know what they are. I hear rumours about what the options may be. I dare say we can probably intuit what a lot of the options will be from existing schemes, but you know, we need some different options to address some new emerging priorities, such as the carbon priority. So that uncertainty, both in scheme design and payment rates, but also in scheme processes. So you've referred to this kind of new focus on clusters, facilitated groups, that being regarded as more important. And yes, it is.
It's that point of scale, though. I think facilitation funds really, or clusters of farmers, really does help. You know, if you're an individual farm that owns, say, 50 hectares or 100 hectares, and traditionally, you know, looking at the literature at the moment, you know, landscape restoration is for way more than that. And what we really want to do, and this is why it's great working with you guys, is come up with a framework that allows those individual farms that may not on their own be able to do anything at landscape scale, easily apply, easily get involved with that more scaled approach that has both, local priorities in mind. You know, is my soil healthy? Is my local stream, you know, receiving runoff or not? But then tying in with the national priorities as well. So yeah, I get the point of scale. And uncertainty, definitely uncertainty is, you know, who knows what's around the corner. And that, from our position, we still see a lot of inertia in the market where people are like, why would I commit now to a 30-year contract when I don't know what's going to be around the corner for something else?
Well, absolutely. And you know, I mean, I was referring to blockers and this thing about facilitated groups, but and you're talking about landscape scale. So we're not necessarily talking about landscape recovery in that. We're talking about probably mostly local nature recovery schemes within facilitated areas. And so I think what I was going to say about one of the blockers about uncertainties, so scheme design, payments, but processes and application processes, scoring processes. This thing about encouraging collaboration, but how will that be done? Will there be payment to facilitate advice? You know, will there be some mechanism to help with that locally? And that's really kind of predicated the formation of this partnership, to say, well, if we can, assuming that won't be provided through national processes, that there won't be a national as it has been in the past, by the way, for schemes through farm environment plans, say, where there was money to pay for that advice and development of the land management plan. If that's not going to be around, can we provide it locally? But it may be around. We don't know. We're kind of trying to make a thing locally through engaging with the Greater Manchester Combined Authority to say, well, if we've got local nature recovery strategies developing, which, by the way, just appear to me to be maps, basically, and not coming with any delivery mechanism so far with them or any targets. We're saying, well, perhaps DEFRA should be providing some kind of, dowry with a local nature recovery strategy, and then we could operate a local partnership with that. But those uncertainties are these barriers.
So. Yeah, I think on all this, we're hopefully during the trial we're unlock. Just my final question, just because of the name of time, is when your trial ends, what do you think good looks like? Does good look like you found a framework that engages everyone? Like what's going to deem your trial to be successful or not?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So as I mentioned, it's the primary barrier being the scale of the task, the number of farms, the number of and the lack of historic engagement. So we've broken through the various elements of our test and trial, and there've been many. So forming the partnership, the board, getting the engagement, starting to look at looking at collaboration. What does that mean? And collaboration to us meant in the end that we would have a collaboration of partners rather than a collaboration of farmers, which is so difficult to get. And then spatial prioritization. How do we do that? And we started to look at land app because we thought that would really help us in handling local data. And then looking at advice and guidance. How do we do that? And ultimately to produce a set of land management plans at whatever scale. So we've drawn, with the help of our spatial prioritization that we've developed locally, 6 focus areas, and we're looking at those areas because of similar landscape character, farming type, etc., and different scales, to say, all right, if we draw 6 focus areas, which all the partners agree are priorities for different reasons, what kind of engagement can we get in those focus areas? So what does good look like? Good looks like we can get significant engagement in those areas to deliver meaningful plans towards doing something about climate change and nature emergencies through delivery of significant ELMs, well-designed ELM schemes and well-supported ELM schemes. Yeah,
okay, well, that's probably quite a nice time to end the Q&A, and I think what I'm going to pick up on your point there is this need to really start mobilizing the supply side, so to speak, of the natural capital markets. Who's willing to do what and where? Who's interested in planting more trees? Who's interested to try and cover crops? Spatially, where can we focus our efforts on, preventing flooding? And I think that element of these land management plans, where we can try and get every farm in the country to get a management plan, even at the first instance, just an expression of interest, so we can start to see and sense where we are and where we could be going into the future. But Mick, thank you so much. I might have a couple of questions during my demo, but what I'm going to do is now move on to a bit of a land app showcase, explaining how facilitators out there can use the land app to both create quick baselines and also start creating these land management plans that Mick spoke of. But thank you very much, Mick. Feel free to turn your camera off and go on mute if you so wish. So what I'm going to do now is, instead of doing a training session as I normally do, I'm going to try and relatively quickly just show you what capacity land app has at building these plans at scale and at speed. So please, don't be put off by how quick I'm trying to move. I just want to show you that building these plans, once you get trained up and start using the land app more, can actually be really quite an efficient process. But I hope I haven't over promised anything either, because there still could be some errors as demos go. So I'm going to assume for now you've got a land app account, and I'm just going to create a new map called demo, and I can assign it to my farming tag if you're on an organization. Within here, what I'm first going to do is I'm going to find my area of interest. So I'm actually going to be showing a bit of a live demo today for one of our tests and trials, which is the Cholmondeley estate, which sits in this area of Cheshire. They've also got another part of their estate as well that isn't going to be involved in the trial. The first thing I'm going to demo is actually the rural payment agency, but for holdings whose SBI number stretches outside of my area of interest. So I'm going to choose this RPA import large holding. And then what I'm going to do is create a frame. And what this does is this just gives me a boundary for which part of the SBI number do I want to download. I can then input an SBI number. And for this demo, I'm just going to get land covers and hedges and call it the Cholm map and hit buy now. And what that does is that hopefully has sent a request to the RPA that's going to get my data. But instead of it serving all of the data that was in the entire SBI number, it's just going to hopefully serve the data that falls within that box that I drew on the map, which should just be part of the Cholmondeley estate. There we are. So it's now extracted it. So just if you're a wildlife trust, for example, or the National Trust, and you want to download data just for a specific part of your farm, you can do that. But just a note, you can only do that on the professional subscription. So what that's now downloaded for me is the Rural Payment Agency's land cover, and it's dropped it for me in the language of basic payment. So what I can do, I'm not going to do it all, but I could, select multiple polygons and start putting in, say, a crop map as well. So hypothetically, these could be barley, and these could be permanent grass, etc. And I'm basically building up a nice picture of what's currently on the ground using BPS. The reason I'm using BPS to start with is it's a language that a lot of the farms understand. So if you're engaging farmers at that individual level, asking about crop types, asking where their crops are, what current rotation they're using, is just a nice introduction to the whole mapping process. Once you've got a BPS map, and I'm just going to fill in these blanks, and just for the demo today, I'm just going to focus on this top corner because the estate itself is slightly larger than what I need. But once you've got your basic payment, you can automatically translate the BPS into the language of the UK habitat classification. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to duplicate my BPS into a BHA, baseline habitat assessment, and that just extracts the codes from the basic payment project and just hopefully will spit them out in the language of UK Hab. So it's translated my temporary grass, my permanent grass, and my cropland into the UK Hab codes. And this really now provides you with a bit of a template about you drafting up those management plans and obviously improving those baselines as well. So just a couple of key things that I would do is I would probably turn on the satellite data and have a look for any margins that might be on the ground. Obviously, I could have drawn those on my basic payment as well, but for example, I can split off this section here, which is clearly something else on the ground according to the satellite, and assign that to a different code. Let's just go for calling it an arable margin with wildflowers. Plus, it's also worth mentioning that you can quite quickly bring over those hedges. So at the moment, the hedges are on a separate layer. I can do that by selecting all of the hedges on the map, right-clicking and clicking copy to plan and bringing them over to my BHA. And then the final point is once they're in the BHA, just remember to select them all, he says, as his computer quickly freezes, select them all and assign them to the UK Hab code of hedgerow. So the moment the hedgerow translation is not within land app, you can see now I've brought over all of my hedges. So that's a really quick baseline, literally just for land cover, understanding what's currently on the ground. And then for drafting those plans, so if you are going out to see farmers, I think one of the key things that we really need people to do is start drawing on these maps where they want to do something else. And so for this part of the farm, for example, I think, yeah, there's a flood zone to the left-hand side. So I've turned on the flood zone layer and I've had a look, and actually there's two parts of these fields that are currently at risk of flooding, or at least lie wet for part of the year. So it might be that as part of the recommendation, we can either take part or all of these two fields out and start looking at putting them into another scheme. What that scheme is, I'm not going to touch on now, but it could be public funding through landscape restoration. Obviously, SFI have got some options around soil health, but also there might be private investment that could work in this area. So when we've been working with the estate, for example, there is interest in the, say, the local water companies and phosphate and phosphorus reduction. But hypothetically, let's say I've been on a farm walk, agreed with the farmer that these 2 fields could come out of production. I can select them by holding shift, right click and copy to a plan. And this time I'm going to create a new plan called land management plan. And what this is this is a spatial view of the farm, but only focusing on the areas that you want to change. And so overlaying on the top, what I've got is I've got my baseline, what's currently in the ground, and I've got my future plan, which is my land management plan. And that principle works for everything. You know, when you're doing a biodiversity offsetting scheme, that's what you need to calculate the units. If you're doing a nutrient neutrality scheme, that's what you need to calculate the units. And when you're doing a countryside stewardship, that principle of drawing the options on is exactly what you do when you're doing a stewardship application. Now, obviously, we're talking landscape level, and I've just been doing it for one farm. And so what I wanted to show you is that, you know, this estate, or this part of the estate, has neighbours. And in this case, that we're actually working with the tenants. So the tenants themselves farm in and around the estate, so kind of filling in all these gaps, are part of our almost landscape. It is a landscape restoration project, or landscape recovery project funded under DEFRA. And what I wanted to show you now is once you've got that habitat map, so I've got a baseline, which is a spatial understanding of what's currently happening. And I've got a land management plan, which is a spatial representation of what could happen next. And just to reiterate that point, you know, I think at the moment, all we're really trying to do is mobilize the supply in understanding what could happen. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. You know, these fields may not turn into wetlands, but just having an understanding of where your farmers or where your different clients are interested in doing things is a really powerful next step into getting these, you know, these ELM schemes and this natural capital markets flowing. So you've got an individual farm, and what I want to do is I want to compare this farm's baseline and this farm's land management plans to what's happening around the outside. And all I need to do is, if I'm on the land app professional, which I am at the moment, I have access to these ticks, these little tick icons next to each of the projects. And when I hover over it, it says it's not yet published. If I click that, what it will do is it will turn green, and it now says it's published to my organization's data layers. And the land management plan is black as well. And again, I can click that green button and turn the state of that plan to published. Now, what that means is that Land App at midnight every night just does a quick sweep of your organization. And so it doesn't share that publicly. It's not publishing it anywhere else other than privately to yourself. But at midnight, it creates you as a facilitator a bespoke data layer. And that bespoke data layer is found, actually I'll keep the flood zone on for illustration purposes. That bespoke data layer is found under this organizational tab. So within data layers, if you haven't published anything, you won't see the word organization. If you've published anything, the next day you'll see an organization layer pop up. And within here, you can see that it's aggregated all of the different plans that I've got published. At the moment, and this is still version 1, by the way, of Map of Maps, there is scope to develop it into the future, but version 1 just aggregates everything on the same project type. So I've got one project at the moment on this map with the baseline habitat assessment in the language of UK HAB, and I've got another one, which is the land management plan. But what should happen if I click this, and yeah, there we are. What I've done is I've clicked that button, and it's now shown me every one of the tenants or the members of my cluster that fall around me. So if I turn off my plan, you can see that what my SBI is doing is filling up the gaps. Each one of these polygons represents a different farm member. And so as we're part of a trial, we've anonymized everyone. So tenant 15, for example, is over in the east, and in the west is tenant number 2. And actually there's 21 different tenants all involved in this project. And so what the estate is doing, Chelmley Estate in partnership with the Cheshire Wildlife Trust, is firstly coming up with a baseline habitat map like I've done and seeing how those baselines fit next to each other, understanding what habitats they currently have. And then secondly, looking at those land management plans, we're really focusing on how can we improve connectivity across the estate. So these tenants in particular are looking at widening hedgerow corridors to form what we're calling a wild edge. And they're also looking at buffering all the watercourses. So really focusing on riparian management and connectivity of the habitats. So you can see this plan's really starting to come together. There's still a couple of estates, and actually we've got the plan for the main estate. I just wanted to use a demo from the start. So this actual area is also contributing to the network as well. But the principle is that if we can, democratize the data in a way that each farm has their own private space to coordinate and collaborate with their advisors, like this. And actually, just to touch on that, I can invite, say, Tim, my colleague, or Tom, my colleague, to my map, and they can come in as either a read only, which allows them to come in and just view my data, come in as an editor, which allows them to come in and play with the data and delete it. And then third one is publisher, which means I give him permission to also create their own map of maps. And this one's actually quite key. And Mick, I'd be interested just to have your thoughts. And so what this publisher level does is, if you're working with another organization, so say hypothetically, in this scenario, we've got Cholmondeley Estate, which owns their own data, but we've also got the Cheshire Wildlife Trust, who are working with them on the behalf. Cholmondeley Estate has invited Cheshire Wildlife Trust to be a publisher. And so when they come in, they can see the data, edit the data, but also create their own map of maps, which will automatically update every time any one of the tenants makes any changes. So Mick, I suppose just to bring you in for just a couple of moments, is how dynamic do you think land management plans, and how important do you think it is that everyone's working off a live data set?
I think this is one of the main potential benefits of this system. It's certainly one of the main potential benefits we'd identified locally, of having locally managed maps and data, that we can do just what you say, so that we've got everyone with permission able to see that live changing scene. Because too often, and I know from working with Natural England had paper maps, which were never digitized. So having a digitized map is a great step forward. Having a digitized map with this kind of flexibility to have a live view is absolutely invaluable to my mind. So yeah, I'm very much liking what I'm seeing. I've got one question.
Yep, go on.
It's about the chargeability of publishing. I don't know what the charging structure is for publishing in the way that you're demonstrating.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And so we used to charge per map that you published. However, we had a lot of feedback from customers just saying that it was quite hard to forecast, especially if you're trying to get funding secured from a private investor or from government. So actually what we've done is we've actually removed map of maps completely from a charging structure, and it's just lumped in with your monthly subscription. So everyone now can do an unlimited map of maps publishing within their price of their professional subscription. And I have got a slide at the end in a moment that I'll talk to you about what that pricing is. So yeah, absolutely good point. But yeah, thanks for everyone who's provided feedback. We no longer charge per map of maps. Everyone who's on the basic subscription, the professional subscription, has unlimited map of maps. So please do use it, because it is a really great asset. Thanks, Mick. Okay, so that was my quick demo, more of a showcase of map of maps, how it's working for the Cholmondeley Estate. What I wanted to do, and I just wanted to spend another couple of minutes just doing a bit of a showcase of two other landscape recovery projects that we're also working with, just to show you what it looks like, because I thought it'd be interesting. So we've got one in the northeast Cotswolds, and thank you, Tim Field, and all of your farmers, and it's a really great project they're working on, which is Northeast Farm Cluster. How can they, mainly focusing on carbon, but also a lot of watercourse protection, create management plans at scale to start delivering the ambitions of ELMs. I did have some stats somewhere. I think it's for 40 or so farmers, about 20,000 hectares is covered. And in this particular map, what you can also see is they've got soil samples all loaded in the land app as well. So they've basically done a full carbon soil sample assessment across each of the farms. And at the moment, they're doing a bit of a comparison between land use type, management, and the impact on soil, to hopefully then start deriving wider rollout of that technique. But that's just a really exciting project that we like to see. And what I wanted to also show you was the official management plan as of, I don't know when this was, I know James and Lucy, you might be on the call from Cheshire and Cholmondeley, Cheshire Wildlife Trust that is, but this is what the plan's looking like at the moment. So visually you can start to see where farms are getting involved. I think there's been a couple of tweaks to this plan, but ultimately we've got all these watercourses that we're protecting. So riparian management, we've got triple SI, so we've got 3 triple SI lakes that are being protected, both upstream by surface runoff, but also around the buffer zone themselves. But ultimately connectivity being key. Hypothetically, can a species get from over here to over there with the existing management? Potentially, but really focusing on widening those corridors and protecting those corridors as assets in the landscape. We're hoping to improve the connectivity alongside all these other points. So yeah, thank you to both of you for both those clusters for letting me share. Appreciate it. And if anyone else, by the way, wants to get involved with the case study, we'd love to hear from you. And Tom, who's on the call at the moment, would be more than happy to have a call and understand how you're currently delivering either local nature recovery or landscape restoration through ELMs. What I wanted to just then touch on is that all of the data that you see on Map of Maps is just spatial. It's really hard to start deriving the value of how much data is in there. What does it actually mean in terms of ratios? So what I've done is I've taken a screen grab from our new metrics dashboard, which summarizes the total area that's within your organization. Purposely, what I've done is I haven't filtered it by this just because, data protection, but you get a high level understanding of all the different organizations that I'm working with. We've got about 18,000 hectares across 56 different farms. And this dashboard is live fed through the Map of Maps API. So if you publish something, it will turn up on your dashboard. This is one of the pages which looks at just the baselines, the breakdown of all the different habitat types. This is just a screenshot, but you can scroll down, for example, and have a look at total area of each different things. There's condition assessment as well. So if you've been doing condition scores, you should get this rotation, live view of the condition assessment. And also, while you're creating those maps from baseline to land management plan, what we can start to do is forecast the biodiversity units as well. So this is based on Natural England's 3.1 metric, but what's currently in the ground, what are you aiming to do? And we can start justifying uplift. So across all of my various different partners that I'm working with, some of them demo maps as well, we can start to see what interventions, this is about 6,000 units of biodiversity habitat units could be generated if all of the plans that we've drafted on the land app were enacted, which includes a lot of condition assessments, a lot of moving from moderate to good. So the real creation units that are being calculated are a lot less than the condition enhancements. But just to give you a flavor that, Map of Maps isn't just fixed to the spatial. We are now building the tech to allow you to start to derive the real insight behind that Map of Maps about what it means, total area, etc. Worth saying that we're aware that what we've built isn't perfect, and we're really keen to hear a bit more about hear from you what would be more useful. So the other day I had a request saying, Dan, what does a good map actually look like? And so I've drafted this. I think, Tom, we could probably share it with everyone after this if anyone's interested. Is in my head, if you're a farm cluster or a member of a farm cluster, I think these are the kind of key templates that underpin your individual farm. So it's ownership boundary, where's your geospatial ownership, which includes the farm buildings. It doesn't just include the agricultural area, for example. And you do that by creating from land registry, farm infrastructure. So where are your existing pipes, existing ditch networks, etc. And so I'd recommend drawing those on, or at least getting someone to help you with those. Then a basic payment scheme and countryside stewardship for obvious reasons. And then the 2 projects that I've just mentioned. So the UK Hab baseline, in the language of UK Hab, what's currently on the ground, to the best of your knowledge, and the proposed land management plan. It is worth saying that we are just about to release something called a one-click baseline, which is a commercial data set that we've made in partnership with Ordnance Survey and UK Hab Limited. But for any farm boundary now, you can purchase an area of land, and we just serve you the best guess of what habitats are on the ground. And we're grateful for all the partners that have fed into that, the Flag Southwest, for example, and UK CEH and others. But if anyone needs more information on that, do get in touch. And And then the final point before we come on to Q&As, and Tom hopefully will be happy that I've left pretty much bang on 15 minutes for Q&As, is just to make you aware that the mobile app is now officially built. I've got it on my phone. We're doing the first round of testing now, but just to make you aware that hopefully in the next couple of weeks and months, anyone eligible for testing, so that's most of our professional users, should receive an email in the next couple of weeks, but we're hoping for the wider rollout in January 2023. But hopefully that will allow you to be a bit more flexible with your use of Land App. Just to quickly and finally touch on the pricing plan that I mentioned. So just if you want to get involved with using Map of Maps to start to visualizing the data, this is the pricing structure at the moment. It is subject to change as we're building more and more, but at the moment, this is how the price stands. So you can you can sign up for a monthly rolling cost in-app. You don't need to have a call with us. You can just upgrade yourself. And this is the price that will be debited to your account. So it works in brackets. So if you're 2 to 5 people, it's just £25 a month. If you then go up to 6 people, it jumps to £50 a month. So just be aware of the different tiers. When I say it's subject to change, due to feedback, we're probably going to move to a per person structure rather than this tiered. But for the moment, this is how it stands in the software. So if you want to get using it today on a monthly basis, please do so. Okay, well, Mick, I would welcome you to come off mute and turn your video back on. And Tom, if you could come and lead the Q&A for us. But thank you everyone for listening.